I'm Robert Moreau, and originally I'm from Faribault, Minnesota, born and raised there, and born in 1927, which is the same year that Charles Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic solo in the spirit of St. Louis. Anyway, when I was drafted, I was working for this wholesale grocery company in Faribault. And anyway, originally I had enlisted in the Merchant Marine. And I was in Merchant Marine for 2.5 years. And that's the reason I was drafted in 1950, because back then the Merchant Marine was not recognized as part of the service. We were part of the Department of Commerce. But President Reagan recognized us as part of the service in, I think, 1975. And then we were given credit for that time in the service. But because it was not part of the service back in 1950, I was drafted. And then I got sent to Korea. Well, first of all, I took my basic in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And I was assigned, because I had a Merchant Marine, or really a Coast Guard certificate for a Marine engineer. So I was assigned at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, to a pontoon bridge company. And that pontoon bridge company, what we did was, over pontoons, we built bridges across rivers and lakes and things of that type. So then come in 1951, I was a sergeant when I was at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, because I was training the cadre there. Anyway, back then they needed sergeants over in Korea. So in 1951, I was shipped over, in July of 51, I was shipped over to Korea and joined the 13th Engineer Combat Battalion, which our duty was to build bridges, build roads, and clear minefields, of which we did. And our major project or campaign over in Korea was we built a road up to the Punch Bowl, which was a famous spot there, and we pulled tanks up there because the tanks didn't have enough power to climb the hill, so we had Heister dozers, bulldozers, there to pull them up, and they could fire point blank down on the North Koreans. So that was our major project. At that time, then we got 2 meritorious awards for doing that. And my main thing that I put down on the sheet there, as I remember, General Lyman Limnitzer was a general there at the time, and he came to our company and gave us the meritorious awards. That was a big deal. Then I got to come home in July of 1952. And that was the end of my career with the Army.
So going back a little bit, can you explain to me more, when did you enlist with the Marines and what did that look like?
With the Merchant Marine?
Yeah.
Well, that was back in 1945 that I enlisted there. And we took our training out at Sheepshead Bay, New York. And that's the reason I could not go to the big celebration down in Times Square, New York, when they ended World War II. I missed that. I could have gone down there and was kissing the Navy girls. that they always bring that up every year now on television. But anyway, so I missed that. But then I was sailing in the Atlantic for 2.5 years. And I was with this private company, with the Saucony Vacuum Oil Company. And we were hauling aviation gasoline and crude oil and that type of thing, and taking it over in the North Atlantic. And there were still German subs out in 1946 yet. There were German subs out in the Atlantic, and they were sinking our merchant marine ships right and left. A lot of them. And actually, there were more merchant marine men lost percentage-wise of any unit in the war.
So why did you choose to enlist with the Merchant Marines?
I had a friend that came back to Faribault, and he was in the Merchant Marine, and the Merchant Marine were paid 3 times more than in the Army. And that's the reason I enlisted in the Merchant Marine, because of the pay.
Good business sense.
Yeah. I was in business when I enlisted that too. Anyway, so that's the way the story went for that.
So when you were drafted, what went through your mind?
Well, really, we knew very little about Korea, because the newspapers and everything, they weren't announcing that at all about the war with Korea. So I didn't have the slightest idea. And there were 6 of us from Faribault that were drafted at the same time, and we went down to Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And all those guys, they got to go over to Germany. But I got to go to Korea.
And what was the exact date of your enlistment?
In 1950. Well, when I was drafted, it was 1950, yeah.
Sorry.
July of 1950. No. So.
So then, what was your date of departure for Korea?
Well, in the early part of July of 1951, I went over to Korea, and we were on a troop ship. We left from San Francisco. Actually, we had to take a train from Kentucky out there, a troop train, and it was hotter in places in that train. Of course, no air conditioning or anything like that, but we made it. And we got on a troop ship and went over to Japan, and then from Japan over to Korea. And we got there in July of 51.
And what unit were you a part of?
I was part of 13th Engineer Combat Battalion. We were attached to the 7th Division. And like I was saying, we were designed to build bridges and roads and clear minefields. When the South Koreans retreated, they had minefields all over the place. None of them were recorded. We, the Army, American Army, when we put in mines, they had to be coordinated and coded where they were and everything about them. But they just threw them out there. So.
The South Korean Army had...
The South Korean, when they retreated there, yeah. So we had to clear those out.
So where did you first land?
We landed in Seoul, Korea, it was probably in late July of 1951 that we landed there. And we were shipped right up to our company, and they needed sergeants for some reason. So that's the reason I got up there. I went up there as a staff sergeant, and after I was there about, maybe 3 months, our present first sergeant was rotating back to the States, so they appointed me as first sergeant. So that I had 9 months over there as first sergeant. A lot of units call him sergeant major, but I was first sergeant of the company.
And can you describe for me kind of your journey? Where did you go from there? What did you do?
Well, we were assigned. I was at the dog company, Company D of the 13th Engineer Combat Battalion, and we were assigned up near Chuncheon, Korea. That's right close by the 38th parallel, and that's where we spent most of our time.
And can you paint me a picture? What was your daily routine like? What were your duties?
Well, we had, I can't remember, 6 squads, and our other sergeants would have to take a squad out to do details of clearing minefields, or had details of building roads, and we had to check a lot of the bridges all the time, because we put across these Bailey bridges. They call them Bailey bridges, and they were constructed bridge, and we build them on one side and push them across the river, and they had to be checked because the North Koreans kind of snuck in there and kind of unloosened the bolts and that kind of stuff in them, so we had to check those all the time. That was kind of a daily duty to check it and to make sure that our tanks and everything could get across.
So can you paint me a picture of what kind of things did you see? What did you experience?
A lot of death. Well, over in Korea, we saw a lot of Koreans. Their homes were just kind of shacks like that they built, and a lot of times we would have to plow those over and making a road to someplace, and we found found a lot of artifacts underneath that they had buried underneath the. In fact, I sent some of them home. And anyway, the U.S. government had paid them $25 for every home that we had to demolish in our route there.
So are there any stories or any experiences that particularly stand out to you?
Well, like I was saying, the one that really stood out is when General Lyman Lemonster came to our company and presented us with the meritorious awards.
What was that day like? Can you describe it for me?
It was really a nice day, a beautiful day, and all of our troops were lined up there, and the general came in and with his aides and everything, and had a nice speech, and then he came over to me personally, and I had 100-power binoculars. They were so strong that you had to lean them on something, otherwise all you'd see was a fluttering out there. So said they were so strong. And he came over to me and wanted to look at that.
So what kind of friendships or camaraderie did you build during that time?
Well, with the mess sergeant, I had a good relationship with the mess sergeant, and every month we would get beer rations, and each troop would get one beer, and we had a company of Turk soldiers from Turkey, not too far away, and our guys, we had powdered eggs and that stuff, and our troops didn't like those at all. So our mess sergeant would have a bunch of powdered eggs. We'd take them over to the Turks. They really liked those, but they got beer also, but they didn't drink beer. So we traded the powdered eggs for beer and brought them back and gave them to our troops. So they had more than one beer a month. And we had one good thing there, that for each tour over there, part of the troops got an R&R trip, and they flew us over to Japan. And I think there was about, maybe 10 of us at each time. And so we had a week over in Japan, and took in all the highlights in Japan.
Can you tell me about it?
Well, it was mostly visiting the theaters and that kind of stuff there, and going to the stores and everything like that, and buying stuff in Japan. It was very, very reasonable, and then we could send it home.
So can you tell me any other memories that you have of your time in Korea?
Well, I can recall our the captain of our company. He got a promotion to go to division headquarters. He got a promotion of major. And he came over to me. He got a little sentimental. And that was almost at the end of my tour there. And he asked me to go with him, and he'd give me a field commission. And and I said, I was ready to go home, and I said, well, what is it going to cost me? He said, 1 year. I said, forget it. I came home. And when I was drafted and left Faribault, I met this really nice gal, and I got engaged. And a year later, we're going to be married. And then I said, I'm going home and get married. And we were married in August. Coming up next Monday is our wedding 63rd anniversary.
So what was the date that you rotated home?
I came home in July of 52, and we were married in August of 52. And I went right back to my old job. They were waiting for me. So it isn't like today that the service, boys getting out of the service, boys and girls, they have a hard time finding a job. But my job was waiting there.
So what was the transition like back into civilian life?
Well, back then, there was very little hoop-de-doo, and the soldiers coming back, just like in Vietnam, they didn't even know we had gotten back. Actually, I had to hitchhike a ride. I was discharged in Camp McCoy, Wisconsin, and I had to get a ride home from there.
So how did that feel?
Well, I woke my parents up at 6 o'clock in the morning. They didn't know I was coming. It felt really good to be back on U.S. soil, though. Very good.
And what have you done since then?
Well, like I say, I went back to work for Consolidated Foods Corporation in the wholesale food business. And after that, they were forced to leave the wholesale retail division. And so then I went to work for the Albert Lea School District. And I was with them for 20 years. I retired in 1989 and enjoyed very much everything so much since then.
So what kind of life lessons do you feel like you learned through your military service?
Well, I don't know. I should be on guard every time from everything, let alone a lot of these scammers and everything else that's going on, and trying to take advantage of the senior citizens. And you really have to watch it nowadays. Of course, in the military, you have to be on guard 24 hours a day.
How do you feel like your time in service has affected your life?
I think it's been for the better. I haven't had any remorse for my time in the service. Actually, sometimes it was very good. When in the United States, when I was in boot camp, it was very good. I had a good time. Actually, at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, a friend of mine that we were drafted at the same time, we went out for the camp football team, and we made the team. And one thing, a captain of our company, he just loved to rub elbows with the general, and after every game we'd have a party, and the general would always come. So I had it made.
So where were you when the armistice was signed?
The Korean armistice? See, that was in 1953. So I was in Albert Lee here and working with Consolidated Foods Corporation. So
So what was your reaction when you heard the news?
I was real happy for it, for all the guys that were over there. But we're still sitting like, what, 35, 40,000 troops over to South Korea. They're permanent there. But, so, and they're still having skirmishes along the border all the time there. But I was real happy that they had signed an armistice and got it over with.
Did you know anybody who was still over there?
No, I didn't. No, because everybody when I rotated, a lot of us rotated along, and I can't remember a lot of names even when we were there.
I can't remember names that I met 5 minutes ago.
But I remember I had a houseboy, a Korean houseboy. He was about 14, 15 years old. We called him Wing, and he took care of our headquarters there. Made my bed, all that stuff. That was when I was first sergeant.
How has your time in the military affected your feelings towards war or military service?
I think war is terrible. I don't know what's going over in the Far East, but that is terrible. I don't think there should be any wars at all. Everybody should be agreeable.
And do you have any message that you could pass on to younger generations?
I don't know, be a responsible citizen and treat your neighbor as yourself.